Have you noticed that developers in movies and TV shows are always just kind of evil? And I'm not talking about impolite. I'm talking bribe politicians, steal from the poor, sink the entire state of California into the ocean. Evil.
There's 50 more houses to tear down after yours.
Seems a stringer bell is worse than a drug dealer.
He's a developer.
This building is gonna ruin the views, you jerk, and you're gonna tear all the houses down?
Yes. Sure, there exist evil people, just like there are evil businessmen, evil politicians, evil in-laws. But as a city planner, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of developers. And, some are the big, bad, crony developers who would eminent domain an entire block just to make a project work. But many more are small developers who don't want to play the politics and just want to build buildings and improve their community. If we want our communities to grow and remain vibrant, developers are a key part of that. So when did the developer become the pop culture stand-in for evil? The evil developer trope. What exactly am I talking about? Well, obviously I'm talking about developers. What did you think I was talking about? I'm talking about a person who renders land usable for a new use. And I'm not talking about, a whole bunch of different kinds of developers, like people who build infrastructure or natural resource extraction or anything having to do with pollution. At some point, the job of development became synonymous with being evil or greedy. Where does this come from? Where are we now? And if you're a city enthusiast like me, what can we be doing better? The year is 1945, World War II is over, and millions of American servicemen are returning home. They're getting married, starting businesses, and having lots and lots of kids. Of course, contraception isn't a thing yet. Now, if you're the smart urbanist who watches my videos, you might be wondering, where are they all gonna live? And you might be thinking, cities? Well, you'd be wrong. People didn't want to live in the city. There was too much crime, too much noise, and of course it's the 1940s, so there's a good deal of racism mixed in. In 1946, a movie came out. You might have heard of it. It's called It's a Wonderful Life. And it really tells the stories of these two different developers. On the one hand, you have George Bailey. He's a good developer. He owns the Humble Building and Loan Association, and they build housing for the good of the community. On the other hand, you have Mr. Potter, who wants to turn a town into Sleazyville, USA. It's here, I think, we get a lasting depiction of what development is going to look like in the decades to come. Development could be the American dream, or it could be a pathway to corruption and degradation. As you could probably tell from the title of the video, we're going to talk about a lot of Mr. Potters. But what about the George Baileys? Where did they go?
And we'll have the living room right in here.
For this first generation of victorious war veterans and their families, developers were held up as heroes. This is reflected in the mid-century modern ideal of suburbanism, the idea of progress, the future, and a great big beautiful tomorrow.
Shining at the end of every day.
Indeed, Walt Disney is the hero of this generation, building Disneyland, Disney World, and the
experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
Geniuses like Disney were going to take us to the future on monorails and flying car superhighways. In fact, between the end of World War II and the early 1970s, there were very few movies that villainized developers. And when you think about it, it's kind of crazy. I mean, there really haven't been many movies that are super positive about change or development recently. Just off the top of my head, the only one I can think of is 2013's Her. And at best, that's really neutral rather than positive about the future. Why is that?
Dream away.
And the Soul Train gang, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and Mighty, Mighty.
Tastiest case I ever cracked.
The year is 1975. Jaws is the biggest movie of the year. You're a young boomer. You know what's hip. You know what's up. You know what's down. Your parents' mortgage. You're in the middle of a recession. There's a little bit of inflation going on. Economists call this stagflation. If your parents foreclose on the house, you're going to lose the only home you've ever known. It's going to get potentially bulldozed and turned into a shopping mall or a golf course or, God forbid, more housing. That's right, folks. Where development was previously about futuristic modernism development, today it's a threat to housing, the bedrock of your nostalgia, everything that's good about America. And this is reflected in popular culture from around the time. There are so many movies where evil developers are the main villain, and I mean so many movies.
Okay, let's get through this before I pass out. 1978, Superman. Lex Luthor is going to sink the state of California into the ocean in order to raise the property value of his desert real estate. 1980, Caddyshack. Nouveau riche Al Shervick is a douchey developer and basically just wants to flatten everything. 1980, Blues Brothers. John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd gotta get the band back together to save the orphanage from you-know-who developers. 1982, Poltergeist. The family is haunted by ghosts because, housing developers were so stingy they built a house on a cemetery without moving the bodies. Who would do that? 1985, The Goonies. The kids go on one last adventure because the developers, those guys, are so eager to foreclose on the dad's house and turned it into a country club for rich people. 1985, summer rental, John Candy has to, sail race with the douchebag real estate mogul to avoid, of course, getting kicked out of their summer rental. 1986, one crazy summer, John Cusack meets Demi Moore, and they have to save their grandfather's house from being turned into, God forbid, condos. 1987, batteries not included. Cute little aliens help an elderly landlord couple fight back against greedy developers who try to rough them up and force them to leave. 1989, Back to the Future 2, where Biff, that guy, is basically Mr. Potter, turning their town into Sleazeville, USA 2.0.
By the late 80s, developers aren't the shiny, futuristic hero of tomorrow. They're greedy, corrupt, immoral, pushy, the types of people who would throw their own grandmother out onto the street just to make a penny. Now, I'm not trying to say, actually the bad guys are good. Most of these people, what they're doing is unethical, in many cases flat out illegal, but what these characters represent about American society is that Americans have done a 180 on growth and change, and the people who make that happen. But why? Just a generation ago, Americans were excited about monorails and flying cars. Remember Walt Disney? Remember Epcot? Remember George Bailey? Whatever happened to George Bailey?
Return to me.
Welcome home, Mr. Bailey.
Working as a city planner, I met a lot of Mr. Potters, trust me, but I also met a lot of George Baileys. In fact, if you spend time with developers, you'll find that often they're decent people who care very deeply about their projects and the neighborhoods they work in. Maybe some are trying to rehab a property so someone can have a home, or they're trying to put shops near where people live, building a walkable community. But here's the rub. The way we plan cities makes developers do bad things. If you were to take George Bailey out of the world of It's a Wonderful Life and drop him off into a modern city with all the zoning and regulations, what would happen? He'll have to go through discretionary approvals, get permits and insurance from all different kinds of agencies, buddy up with all different kinds of public officials, take jabs from every direction from city council. Here's what he'll end up having to do. Either sweet, wholesome George Bailey is going to realize he doesn't want to have anything to do with this political racket, and he's going to find another career.
I don't need 24 hours. I don't have to talk to anybody. I know right now. And the answer's no. Doggone it. You sit around here and you spin your little webs and you think the whole world revolves around you and your money. Well, it doesn't, Mr. Potter.
Or George ultimately becomes the crony that the system forces him to be. He's going to have to play the game, buddy up with power players and policymakers. Over time, George becomes Mr. Potter.
Where's that money, you silly, stupid old fool?
The scene is all these bad developers who have stuck around and played the game. But the unseen is all the good developers who never materialize because they don't want to get involved in development. Looking at the system from the outside, you might think, oh my god, developers are so evil. And if you think like that, well, kid, you got moxie, you got guts, you got what it takes to make it in this city. Get me Jerry, we're gonna make a goddamn movie. But this is where I want to pause for a minute, because in the 80s, it's mostly been a battle between good developers and bad developers. Developers could be good if they just wouldn't poach poor Mr. Walsh's house and try to turn it into a playground for rich people. As far as bad developers go, their badness is individual to who they are, but land development under this theory isn't inherently bad. Am I foreshadowing something? The year is 2002. You're a young millennial. You're going with your parents to see Hey Arnold the movie. The premise, Future Tech Industries wants to flatten Arnold's neighborhood. They're gonna build a shopping mall. And the CEO's like,
out with the old, in with the new.
And Arnold's like,
what's wrong with old things?
So your little kid brain is thinking, I don't want my neighborhood to get destroyed and have to change schools and lose all my friends. And then you realize change is bad. And then you realize in big people words, development is bad. Where before movies had a bad developer fighting with a good property owner, increasingly in the early 2000s, you get a situation where change is befalling an entire neighborhood. We go from the evil developer trope to development being inherently evil. This is what some people have in mind when they talk about the term gentrification, essentially a neighborhood being changed to be more suitable to middle-class preferences, but often at the cost of the existing less affluent residents. Fast forward to today, and this is a common storyline on Starz' Vita and Netflix's Hentified. You have stories about the Hispanic neighborhood of Boyle Heights in Los Angeles dealing with gentrification. Both shows depict the gentrifiers as being insensitive, out of touch, and working with them as a betrayal of the local Latino community.
There's nothing gentrifiers hate more than being called gentrifiers.
And it makes sense. If you've lived in a neighborhood for decades or maybe even centuries and the rents are rising and your community's getting kicked out and replaced by people who don't look like you or speak like you, it can be frustrating.
But as with everything in urban planning, it's a little more complicated than that. Let's think about it from the other direction. Imagine you're coming from rural Iowa, you have a dream of making it big in LA. You work hard and save from every paycheck and eventually can make the move. There are two ways this could go down. The first would be to bid up the price of existing housing, unseating someone else, maybe a retired abuelita. Or we could allow enough housing to be built so that this newcomer doesn't have to push anyone out. The reality is that zoning regulation and local laws basically force all change to only come in the form of kicking out current residents, instead of just making room for everyone.
And you see this gentrification theme in all kinds of shows: Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Daredevil, even King of the Hill. Beginning in the 2000s, the gang can't just get back together and fight off the evil developer and everything will get better. No, the threat is change and development itself. Today, TV shows don't cast the developer as being evil because he's rude or greedy. They cast him as evil because development is inherently evil. He's just kicking people out and replacing them with richer people, instead of actually building more housing. Now, these problems are real and complicated. Basically, all of our major cities have a really serious affordable housing crisis. But it's bad policy that makes development bad. We have to remember that. Zoning and housing constraints mean that no new housing can be built, so all the change that happens in our communities takes the form of painful evictions or rent hikes. Developers, like farmers and doctors, provide an essential service. We should want them to do well, and we should build a system that makes them do better. Evil developers are not likely to leave the silver screen anytime soon, but they don't have to be in our communities. If we want to build better, stronger communities for everyone, with more jobs and opportunity and better housing, we need to build a system that gets us fewer Mr. Potters and more George Baileys.
Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath?
Return to me.
That's all for this episode of Pop Culture Urbanism. I've been your host, Nolan Gray. Go ahead and help us out. Hit that like button if you like what you saw today. And if we missed an evil developer who you are particularly drawn to, let us know in the comments below. Of course, there will be more videos. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.
Return to me.
Actually, the bad guys are good.